All right, good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar featuring American Pharmacy's partner, Long-Term Care at Home Pharmacy Network. Whether you're familiar with the Inflation Reduction Act or not, it's coming. Any pharmacy strategy, it's critical to connect and consult with experts when industry-wide changes occur. If you haven't yet, it's important to get educated now and prepare for how your pharmacy will operate once the IRA dynamics officially begin. The Home Pharmacy Network is an excellent source for guidance and education, and I can't say enough great things about their team, including Paul and Carly. They've been a great partner, consistently working with us with a shared focus on innovation to support independent pharmacy growth and advancement. They take exceptionally great care of their pharmacy customers and have already helped many of our members maximize the value of their patient candidates. If you haven't already, I highly recommend connecting with Long-Term Care at Home Pharmacy Network. And if you haven't evaluated your pharmacy's LTC at Home opportunity, it's time to do so. It's a great investment of your time and will most likely yield strong opportunity for your pharmacy business. The rate of reimbursement is diminishing, especially on the branded side, and injecting stronger reimbursement is a welcome improvement worth considering. So without further delay, I'll hand it off to Paul. Thank you, Paul.
Thanks so much, Jeff. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. We're coming to you from not so sunny New Jersey today. We're actually out in the field working with pharmacies to help them get stronger and better in the long-term care and long-term care at home space. So we took a pause in the afternoon to talk about the IRA and long-term care at home. And so hopefully you guys will find some interesting information about this and be able to hopefully make some different decisions around it. So hopefully everybody can see my screen. If for some reason you can't, please put a note in the chat and we will go from there. All right. So before we dive into what is the IRA, we really need to talk about some definitions because there's a lot of acronyms in this, like any federal government program. As a prior service military member, one of the most terrifying things you can hear is I'm from the federal government and I'm here to help. And in this case, it definitely applies. So the IRA is the Inflation Reduction Act. It's actually a 2022 act that was implemented initially in 2023, so that's a typo there. Sorry, 2022 Act. It focused primarily on green energy tax incentives, and then tagged into that was some drug pricing that allows Medicare to negotiate on behalf of their members. This is the first time it's actually allowed Medicare to do bulk negotiation on behalf of Medicare Part D plans. And so really the Inflation Reduction Act as it pertains to pharmacy is a very small portion of the overall act itself, although it's going to have a very material impact on pharmacy going forward. So when we talk about a dispensing entity, this is a pharmacy or other dispensing locations. Other dispensing locations are dispensing physicians' offices. They can be smaller pharmacies. They can be LTC pharmacies, but generally it is a location where medication is dispensed to a patient, whether that's in a traditional pharmacy setting or a medical practice setting. That's a dispensing entity. The Medicare Transaction Facilitator, or the MTF, and this is where it starts to get a little confusing because we have the MTF, the MFP, a bunch of other random acronyms that are new to the industry. So the Medicare Transaction Facilitator is an entity that has been created to manage a rebate process for dispensing entities. There were a bunch of different ways we could have done this, and I think where we are right now is CMS is kind of landing on one of the more challenging options. It'll be interesting to see where our manufacturer partners all come out. We have not seen any updates for publicly available information since the 1st of September when the manufacturer partners were supposed to submit their initial review. And so really we haven't seen a lot of change in the last week and a half in what could be. So the next thing we want to talk about is the maximum fair price. Maximum fair price is the price that is negotiated and paid by Part D plans for the covered drugs, and the average is about 64% lower than current WAC. All right. So what drugs are impacted? Right now, it's going to be these 10 drugs. So Januvia, Novolog, Farxiga, Enbrel, Jardiance, Stelara, Xarelto, Eliquis, Entresto, and Imbruvia. Interestingly, several of these drugs have already got a generic in the market, and several others of them will have a generic within the next 24 months. So in this case, while it's a major impact to Part D spending, what we're looking at is really not that much of a overall long-term savings for Medicare. This year, starting on January 1st, we're seeing this is about 20% of Part D total spend are in just these 10 drugs. So I'm gonna let that sink in for a second. So 20% of Part D spend is in just these 10 drugs. With an average of a 64% reduction off of WAC, what we're going to look at here is a roughly 13% reduction on Part D reimbursement for pharmacies. Where that really starts to become challenging is where we look at the overall profit indicator, but we'll get there in a second. So these 10 drugs are impacted. Most retail community pharmacies have either slowed down their dispensing of these drugs or have stopped them altogether. But here's where we are. All right, so what will happen? So we're going to see a 64% reduction in cost of medication to Part D plans and to beneficiaries, meaning that the beneficiary will have a maximum fair price and the Part D plan will have a maximum fair price that is significantly lower than it is today. There are a couple different ways that could be addressed, which we'll talk about later, but it's a 64% reduction in revenue on those Part D plan claims. So this is roughly, again, 20% of the Part D spend, and is going to be impacted. And so when we think about that, that's a 13% reduction in revenue. So 13% of all Part D revenue will be removed from the pharmacy. Now, when we think about this, there's a couple different ways to look at revenue. The way I look at revenue is, what did the Part D plan sponsor pay me for the claims that I submitted to them? If you are doing, let's say, call it $500,000 a month in January, you can see as much as a $35,000 cash flow impact in January and early February. And the reason for that is, even though there's a 21-day quote guarantee for rebate payment after file upload between the difference in the manufacturer fair price and WAC. I don't know if anybody remembers how Part D went when it rolled out. It was not necessarily the smoothest of processes, and we anticipate some additional challenges in this case. Interestingly, the manufacturers had several choices in how to deal with this, and as I said, right now the way it's looking is that we're going to be going through a rebate process through the Medicare Transaction Facilitator. So what do you do in reference to the IRA? So the first step is get enrolled with the Medicare Transaction Facilitator. It's been reinforced over and over that just by enrolling, that does not mandate that you fill Part D claims next year. This just gets your pharmacy, gets your NPI and NCPDP enrolled in the process, so that should you choose to participate in the program, you have the opportunity to. The earlier you get enrolled, the more time you have to review the not publicly available information that the facilitator's providing to enrolled pharmacies. So the next step would be to review information as it's made available. We anticipate this happening over the next 2 to 3 weeks, as the manufacturers are required to submit their plan for MFP as of September 1st. Now, we have heard through the grapevine, again, we haven't seen confirmation of this, but we've heard through the grapevine that at least one, if not multiple manufacturers, are just going to move their WAC from current WAC to the manufacturer's the maximum fair price. And so if they do that, what that means is, not only do you lose the revenue and then have to wait on a rebate to get that revenue, get the remainder of that revenue back, the revenue just goes away. And so that could be not just a cash flow impact, but it could be actually a profit margin impact for the pharmacy. So as you have a chance to review this information, and we do updates on this over the course of, say, the next 2 or 3 months, in December, you can determine whether or not you want to contract with Part D plans. Now, this is both on the retail and the long-term care side. You do have some options on whether or not to participate in Part D, but obviously for most pharmacies, that makes up the bulk of their reimbursement, to the tune of, in some cases, 80 to 85% of total reimbursement. So the alternative is to find ways to increase revenue today that will impact the loss of revenue to have in early January. And so, if it's okay with Jeff, I'd like to pause here and see if we have questions that we could answer specifically about the IRA before we jump into the next phase of our conversation.
Yes, sir. Of course.
Okay. So if you have a question, probably the best way to ask that is to put it into the chat, and Carly will then be able to process it out for everybody to see. Carly, do we have any questions coming in at this point? If not, I can jump into the next phase of the conversation.
I do not see anyone currently, no.
Okay, too easy. All right. So, as we said here, find other ways to increase your revenue to offset this loss. So there's not just one way to do this. There's quite a few, and we're going to talk about several of them today. I did fail to mention when we first started off, if you guys have not seen a gentleman by the name of Guy Kawasaki, who is a very solid speaker. He's wrote a book called The Art of Enchantment. He was the first chief enchantment officer at a small startup in Cupertino, California, that turned into one of the largest organizations in the world, Apple, and Macintosh. And he learned how to communicate there very effectively. One of the things he says is when you start, tell people how many slides you have so they know how long they have to suffer through your speaking. In this case, it's 12. We're about halfway through. So we're going to continue on now. All right. So if we're looking at ways to increase our reimbursement, one of the things that we very quickly look to, if you were at ThoughtSpot this year, they did a great job of articulating there's some new things happening that can increase reimbursement for pharmacies, and one of those things is LTC at home. And so when you look at, okay, I'm going to have a 13% reduction in overall Part D revenue. Is there a way for me to offset that? I'm going to lose 5 to 6% of my, potentially lose 5 to 6% of my overall profit dollars. Is there a way for me to offset that? And one of the ways to do that is LTC at home. So the first question really is, why is LTC at home happening? What's LTC pharmacy at home happening? And basically, it's because the baby boomer generation is entering the phase of life between, say, 70 and 100. And they're doing the same thing they've done to every single market they've ever entered, which is they're changing the reality. They're changing the paradigm within the market and saying, okay, I'm not letting healthcare happen to me. I am going to let healthcare be something that I participate in with my provider. I'm going to dictate where I'm going to be. And so many of these patients do not want, or they cannot access or cannot afford institutionally based care. With some recent cuts to Medicaid, we're going to see more and more patients not put into institutional care and push towards more long term or at home care for long term care services and supports, because you can cover more people with fewer dollars by doing that. So obviously the next question is long-term care at home worth it? These are examples, obviously, because this is a public forum, we cannot share specific information. However, we can share some generalized information. Um, Pharmacies can receive increased reimbursement, significant increased reimbursement. In one of the two payers that pay for LTC at home, you're seeing brand reimbursement at AWP minus 14 with a 250 to 325 dispensing fee and a generic effective rate of 78 to 80. And on the generic side of MAC or NADAC plus 250 dispensing fee. And so when you're looking at that, what that means is you're seeing across the board about $67.64. And this is about, let's call this 8-month-old, 9-month-old data based on the average revenue per prescription. We did see a small pickup in overall prescription revenue last year, almost exclusively due to GLP-1s. And so we chose to exclude that from the data because while it does still impact those very heavily, that particular medication is not used as frequently in this population. And so our average prescription volume on a per patient basis is slightly lower than national average. So we're seeing a $67.64 average revenue and about $20.37 in average gross margin. So compared to a retail prescription, this is about a $7.80 increase overall. Now it's interesting when you look at this, we do have there's two different payers that pay for LTC at home. One is Express Scripts and one is Optum. In the Optum modality, the branded reimbursement is very similar, if not exactly the same, to the retail reimbursement. However, generic reimbursement is materially higher. And so by that I mean between $8 to $9, round about $8.50 in increased reimbursement on a per generic basis. Obviously, not every generic is increased by that much, but you do see some that go up by $37 and some that go up by $6, and averages out to $8.50. And so when you see that larger increase in reimbursement on the Optum side, it's offset by the brand staying flat. You're not getting that increased reimbursement from the brand side. So the opportunity at increased volume here is from dispensing fees and ingredient cost over retail. So again, you're getting an actual dispensing fee. In some cases, that's $2.50. In some cases, it's $1. In some cases, it's $3.25. And so when you look at the increase in molecule reimbursement and the increase in that dispensing fee, what you're seeing overall is a material pickup in revenue. The other opportunity here is volume, because the way that LTC at home is filled is you first synchronize the patient. You must provide compliance packaging, which we'll talk about in a second. Instead of getting an average of, call it 8.1 to 8.2 filled prescriptions per year per prescription, which is how our higher performing pharmacies like American Pharmacies members are performing, you're seeing an average of 12 to 12 and a half prescriptions fills per year. And again, that depends on if you're doing a 30-day or 28-day supply. And so what we're seeing in that situation is, obviously, it's not just the increase in the per prescription dispense reimbursement, it's an increase in overall number of dispenses. And so you're taking those fills from, on an average patient basis, if you have 9 prescriptions per patient, or actually let's use 10 prescriptions per patient, you're going from 80 total fills to 120 total fills a year at the higher margin. And so there's a significant increase in overall revenue for the pharmacy. So it's all well and good to say, hey, you've got an opportunity here, but what does that opportunity look like? Who are those patients? To find LTC at home patients, there is a solution that we are actively working with American Pharmacies on, called a long-term care at home population assessment, which is where we can review claims data and get a very specific list of patients that are high propensity to be LTC at home. But you need to qualify those patients, and those patients can qualify in one of 3 ways. The first way is they're part of a home and community-based services waiver or other qualifying waiver, Medicaid or Medicaid or Medicare waiver program. So these qualifying home and community-based services waivers are basically, they're part of a Medicaid program that allows for the increase of long-term care services and supports for patients that have a long-term care level of care need and reside in their own home. So when you look at these, the easiest way to identify them within your pharmacy is actually to look for patients that are under 65 that have access to Medicare Part D. There are 3 federal waiver programs, one of which actually imputes long-term care, guarantees long-term care home access. And then there are, depending on your state, between 4 and 9 state waiver programs. State waiver programs are primarily based on individuals with intellectual or developmental delay, traumatic brain injury, or physical mental disability. And so when you see a patient, usually you can identify which of the state waiver programs they may be on. If you have a patient who is on a federal waiver, there are 3 of those. One is the HIV waiver. Once you have HIV for a specific period of time, you can get access to Medicare Part D through a treatment waiver program. However, it does not impute a long-term care level of service, because with the advent of more advanced HIV medications and PrEP therapies, you can lead a relatively normal life with HIV, and so it does not impute a long-term care level of care. The same thing applies to the sickle cell waiver. So certain individuals with qualifying other conditions and sickle cell can qualify for a federal waiver to access Medicare. Sickle cell can be managed through a combination of behavioral transformation and medication transformation in most cases to lead a relatively normalized lifestyle, with some caveats, and therefore it does not extend to a long-term care level of service. However, the 3rd federal waiver, which is called the dialysis waiver, is for end-stage renal disease patients with dialysis, and that does impute a long-term care level of service. The reason for that is there are two ways to leave dialysis treatment. One is with a kidney transplant, and the other is unfortunately feet first in a body bag. Once you've been on dialysis for 90 days, it's almost impossible or very, very, very rare for a patient to leave the care of a nephrologist and dietitian other than through kidney transplant in that situation. So that does impute a long-term care level of care. So even though a patient who's newly on dialysis can be fully functional and in the community, as their disease state progresses and they are dialyzing longer, their ability to self-sustain without support dramatically drops, and therefore it does impute a long-term care level of care. So that's the first way, is through these waiver programs. Again, easy way to find these patients in your pharmacy. Medicare Part D under the age of 65. Most modern prescription management platforms allow you to look that up pretty easily. Gives you a good idea of who you're looking for. Again, ESI and Optum are the two primary payers for this level of service, although there's also Navitas and Magellan for Medicare Part D plans, but for most pharmacies, that's less than 3 to 5% of your total population. All right, so the second way a patient can qualify. And this is a patient was discharged from a long-term care facility in the past month. So in this case, when we say long-term care facility, we're talking about a skilled nursing rehabilitation facility. And this is a short stay rehabilitation facility specifically under Medicare Part A. And once that patient leaves that Medicare Part A stay, they qualify automatically for LTC at home for 6 months. So we do have an attestation form that we can fill out that you just literally check they are in the facility for at a specific point, write the dates, then sign off. That's how you attest that that patient was in an LTC facility in the last 6 months. Now, finally, there is a way to qualify a patient through level of service. And it's important to note that the patient has to have all 4 of the following conditions. And that is the support needed with 2 or more activities of daily living, whether that's IADLs or BADLs. They need to have 3 or more chronic conditions. The patient needs to be on multiple medications for those conditions. And if you notice there, it does not say a minimum of 6 or a minimum of 5 or a minimum of 4. They need to be on multiple medications for their chronic conditions. And the patient has limited mobility that makes it so they cannot leave the home independently and without it creating significant difficulty. And so the best way to identify that is if the patient cannot easily get themselves to the pharmacy to pick up their medications by themselves, then they would qualify for that one. We do have, again, an attestation form that we can share with the American Pharmacies team for everyone to receive who's attended. That is just a form that allows you to see how these patients would qualify, a list of those activities of daily living, as well as the chronic conditions and the rest of the form that you need to fill out to get those folks squared away. All right, and as I said, here's the form on the right-hand side. So we did, again, patient qualification and is attested by a pharmacist and renewed every 6 months. So it's a little hard to see there, but you can see the actual ADLs in this middle section here, which is 2A, and then the chronic conditions, which is 2B. If you want to download this form, there's a QR code on the right-hand side of the screen, and I'm going to move my cover here just to make sure it's not blocking that for you. But you can just hit that QR code and download that immediately to your phone, email it to yourself. So patient medication delivery or representative pickup is renewed at change of delivery or pickup status. And there's a different form that we utilize to confirm that the patient is actually receiving their meds through delivery or patient pickup. And then finally, the patient care. So you need to, in addition to providing all the things we're going to talk about in the second round long-term care, you need to provide a medication dispensing review on a minimum of a monthly basis. Patient and provider care coordination communication, you can do that through a physician outreach program. And then also transitions of care. So a patient is moving from skilled into the home or from the home into the hospital, providing feedback to the physicians and providers within those spaces to make sure that the patient has all the information and the medications that they need. All right, so how do I do this? To be able to provide long-term care at home services, you first must meet the requirements of being an LTC pharmacy. So comprehensive inventory capacity, that's something you actually do in your pharmacy today if you can provide controlled substances and generally most medications within the pharmacy, that would be where that pops, that's you're satisfying that. pharmacy operations and prescription orders. That's a prescription management platform that's modern, basically computer-based prescription management platform. Special packaging. This one's probably my favorite question because what is special packaging? Really, that just means anything but a vial. If the patient doesn't want special packaging, that means they're not a long-term care patient. I'm going to say that again so that we reiterate it. If the patient is not receiving special packaging, they are not a long-term care at home patient. Let's see. So IV medications. So you must be able to provide IV and custom compounded medications. If you'll notice, there's a little asterisk next to both of those, as well as pharmacy on-call service and medication delivery. The asterisk says that it can be outsourced to an outside provider and is not something that you have to provide in-house. Miscellaneous reports, forms, and prescription ordering supplies. Again, you meet that with modern prescription management system. And the last two, which is emergency boxes and emergency logbooks. These aren't used if you're only doing long-term care at home, but you still must have the capacity to provide them. So what we recommend is that you go buy the least expensive tackle box you can possibly find anywhere. That can be at a Walmart, Amazon, you know, your local Ace Hardware. We don't care, but get a tackle box that is, reasonable size. So call it 6 inches tall, 6 inches deep, a foot long. There's no requirement here, but it would need to be able to hold some medication. And then print off an emergency logbook. If you type in emergency logbook, emergency prescription logbook, there's about 50 different versions that come up in free forms online. Print one page of that off, put it in the top of the tackle box, put the tackle box in your pharmacy, and now you can meet the criteria. All right, so we're going to pause here real quickly and go through some of the questions that we have out there. So we have a question from Grant: is the compliance packaging mandatory for dispensing? Yes. So Grant, it is required for each packet for each dispensing. In this case, it is only for the maintenance medications. You do not have to provide PRN medications or short like IV therapy not IV, antibiotic therapy medications in special packaging. It's just for the maintenance medications. And so the next question was, does LTC at home or other service help identify the patient population for pharmacies that qualify for the programs? Yes, we do have what's called a long-term care at home population assessment. More to follow on that, but there's some interesting ways that we're working with American pharmacies to find ways to make that a very accessible program for AP members. Currently, we do have a pretty aggressive discount on that service. There is a cost for it because it does take our data scientists about 2 hours to process the data, but we have that we definitely can help with that. So Brian, does the pharmacy have to have an LTC NPI combo license, or can you use a retail NPI? This is a great question. It's probably one that is a common misconception. But yes, you do need to have currently an LTC NPI and combo license. It's not really a license change. It's a second NPI and NCPDP. The states don't require a different license, or the contracts don't require a different license. Basically, you use your one license number, your one TEA number, and then you go from there into having the two separate NPIs. So you have one NPI that's a retail NPI, the other NPI that's a long-term care NPI, and then two separate NCPDPs. And the long-term care NCPDP contracts with the long-term care PSAO, and the retail NCPDP contracts with the retail PSAO. Elevate in most cases for you guys. And yes, Heidi, we can put that QR code back up at the end and the recording will be shared. Okay, so that's all the questions that we have as of right now. All right, so let's continue on. I'm assuming you don't have any other questions on the operation standards of the standard operating of services. So let's look at what are the minimum services required to be able to package out for, or to be able to provide this for customers. So compliance packaging with medication synchronization. So the compliance packaging, there are two different kinds of packaging that can be utilized, or really 4 different kinds of packaging that can be utilized in this case. You can have unit dose blister cards, unit dose strip packaging. You can have multi-dose blister cards, multi-dose strip packaging, and if you really, really don't like your technician team, you can even use the old Opus cassette system. But that is by far the most most manual version of how to do this. We strongly recommend multi-dose compliance packaging for patients at home. Due to the nature that a card really doesn't provide a lot more clarity for a unit dose card does not provide a lot more clarity for the actual patient to know what they're to be taking at any specific time, because again, it has the instructions. If the patient struggles with vials, they're going to struggle with the card as well. Multi-dose does make it a lot easier because it can be modified so that it meets the patient where they are. So if they are a low health literacy or a low literacy patient, you can put an engram essentially on each of those that they can look at and say, oh, that's a sun with an up arrow. I know that's my breakfast dose. So we do strongly recommend multi-dose compliance packaging, and this is out of a necessity, not convenience. So I like to think I'm a reasonably competent adult person in the pharmacy world. I get my medications packaged every month in compliance packaging, frankly, because it's an ease of use, it's a convenience. That does not mean that I'm an LTC at home patient. So we must provide delivery out of necessity due to limited mobility, again, not because of convenience. My pharmacy is just a little bit too far away for them to be able to deliver to my home. And so, again, even if they did deliver, I would still not be a long-term care home patient because it would be a convenience for me, not a necessity. Every month when you do a medication dispensing review, this is a combination of a medication reconciliation, drug utilization review, and then this needs to be done at a minimum of a monthly, but can be performed and documented every time a medication is dispensed. So if you have a mid-cycle change, you need to make sure that you're documenting that and submitting it out to the physicians as well. Care coordination. What this means is that I'm coordinating across all the caregivers that the patient has. So if, let's say the patient is a chronic kidney disease patient, they're in stage 4 of the disease, so
Paul,
they probably are under the care of an
Paul,
endocrinologist, a cardiologist. Yes.
you cut out.
Yes.
If you'll go back like 30 seconds.
Okay. Can you go back 30 seconds? Or can you hear me now?
Yes, you're
Okay.
good now.
Sorry about
You're
that.
unfrozen. No, that's okay.
Okay. Gotta love internet connections, right? Okay. So delivery is out of necessity due due to limited mobility. Review is a combination of the medication reconciliation and the drug utilization review. And then care coordination is important because this is, if you, let's say again, when the example I was using was a CKD4 patient, so stage 4 of chronic kidney disease. In that stage, they should have care of a nephrologist, an endocrinologist, a cardiologist, and a primary care physician. The nephrologist may be prescribing things that the PCP is unaware of, and vice versa. And if you can provide data to all of the caregivers for that person's care team, it makes it so you don't have duplicate therapies and increases the quality and outcomes for that patient. Transition of care management. So, can you support the needs of a patient transitioning between different levels of care? If a patient is in, let's say, not palliative care, but let's say they're in respite care. So, meaning that they're in care while their caregiver needs to take a break and recoup. Um, and they transition out of that back into the home. Are we making sure that we're providing medication that's easy for each of those care stages to use? Compliance and care documentation. So we need to have a qualification or an attestation every 6 months. We strongly recommend putting this in as a cash prescription on the patient's profile, and then just updating that and updating the document on it. It's an easy way to make sure you're doing that. Put it with 180-day days filled, and that means every 180 days you're getting a reminder, hey, go ahead and fill this again, and that allows you to remember to get that attestation done. If the patient is choosing not to have delivery but to have a caregiver pick up their medications, you will need to do a delivery and pickup attestation. And then finally, you'd have the merit review and care coordination. That's also you'll need to document. Those can be documented within your prescription management platform, such as like Pioneer, Liberty, BestRx, any of those. You can just document it right there on the patient notes. And then last is 24/7 availability. Now, there's a couple different ways that pharmacies provide this. One is they have a cell phone number that it's called into, and they're like, "Yeah, we can do. Yeah, we can answer that whenever someone calls." That is the hard way to do that from our perspective. This is something we strongly recommend to outsource to a non-clinical care provider or non-clinical 24/7 provider, and when clinically necessary, have that provider call the pharmacy owner or pharmacist's cell phone. The upside to that is, in large volume long-term care home pharmacies are seeing maybe 2 to 3 after-hours calls a year that are actually medically emergent. But you do have to have the availability of having someone answer the phone so we can determine that. And so by using a non-clinical triage team, it definitely most of the calls you're going to get are, can you tell me when my delivery is going to be tomorrow? It's like, no, but I'll have someone call you from the pharmacy first thing in the morning. They take a note, they send it to your pharmacy. All right. So we have a question from Hayden, which is, can you charge for the after hours calls? That is a fantastic question, Hayden. And the answer is you already are. You're not charging the patient, you're charging Medicare Part D. By requesting the increased level of reimbursement for long-term care and submitting the claims under an LTC pharmacy services type or pharmacy services type of 5, what you're doing is you're basically communicating or committing to the Part D plan that you're meeting all of these criteria, and in return they increase the reimbursement for your pharmacy. And so that's where that extra $7 to $8 per prescription comes from on a monthly basis. Great question. Thank you. All right. So what are some additional revenue opportunities that segue nicely into long-term care at home, or actually are I would say symbiotic to long-term care at home? What we're finding is that LTC at home opportunities are great. Most pharmacies are seeing between $4,000 to $5,000 a month of increased revenue in their pharmacy by converting existing patients. What we're not capturing on top of that is all of the referrals that the doctors are sending in. This is again just capturing your conversions. That's also not including the additional fills that you're seeing instead of the retail, that kind of 8.1, 8.2 fills. You're going up to that 12 and a half or 12 to 12 and a half fills. So in addition to that, there's a great opportunity because you're talking to the patient on a monthly basis to talk about vaccination programs that you're operating within your pharmacy. Also pushing and having the opportunity to talk to the patient about point of care testing. Obviously, if they're long-term care at home, they can't get into the pharmacy by themselves, but they can have a caregiver bring them in for point of care testing. And then also finally, let's see. And also, finally, is the medical billing. So medical billing is an opportunity. It's up and coming. We're seeing some really interesting opportunities with some companies providing clinical engagement for medication, for what I would call for chronic care management, remote patient monitoring, and RTM, which is remote treatment monitoring. And so when you're looking at the remote treatment monitoring, especially, there's a couple of companies out there that are doing really interesting work where they do the bulk of the lift for the pharmacy. The pharmacy still needs to make notes on a monthly basis, but when they do that, they are reimbursed a small amount, not a huge, maybe $20, $25 per patient that's on the service. And Scott, just like the charge for the after hours calls, you can't charge for delivery because it's part of the requirements for LTC at home. And again, on average, we're seeing about $70 increase in revenue per patient per month, and so it makes it very easy to afford the small cost of the 24/7 access and the delivery on a per patient basis. Our goal is to deliver 1.1 or fewer times per month per patient. And so if we can deliver once per month, that's great. If it's 1.1, that's okay. That basically is the one-off fills, the antibiotics, the changes that aren't able to be pushed away by the pharmacy, meaning be pushed to the next cycle. All right. So that concludes our presentation. Does anyone have questions that were not answered during the previous portion of the meeting? Well, make sure you guys can see that QR code again so that you can download that as needed. Carmen asks, what is the cost of the program? Great question, Carmen. So for the Long-Term Care at Home Pharmacy Network membership, the cost is for American pharmacies is $810 per year for membership. That's for an annual membership. Membership includes the following. It is a one CE for one pharmacist that's 4.5 hours apiece. Access to weekly office hours, access to policies and procedures for long-term care, which you'll need to get credentialed, and then also access to the knowledge base that we have built out for patients and all of the attestation documentation. Additionally to the long-term care home pharmacy network, you will need to create a relationship with a long-term care PSAO. The one that seems to be the most preferred in the LTC at home space is GeriMed. However, there's another one that also does this in the LTC space, which is Innovatix. And there's a small cost to each. They're charged a little bit differently. GeriMed is a flat rate of $200 per month, and that gets you access to both their GPO and their PSAO, or the group purchasing side, and their PSAO, which is the reimbursement. And then on Innovatix, it's based on the number of claims that you submit through their network. All right, Jeff, did you have any questions that anybody had texted you or asked you at this point?
No, sir.
All right. As we get more information on the direction of the array, we're going to be communicating with Jeff. That's obviously not a core focus of the long-term care at home pharmacy network, but it is one that's a driving question for the vast majority of our members, and so that's something we're going to be monitoring. We're getting some more information both from our Syncora partners as well as from some of our partners up in DC about how this is going to impact pharmacy. So as we see those, we'll be communicating those out to Jeff, and he can get that feedback out to the membership.
Paul, I did have a request. Can you go back to the slide with the drugs that are impacted?
Yes, of course. All right.
And there is a QR code in the top right for those as well.
Yep.
We
And
have
that's
another
actually
question.
that's the CMS's link. So would a patient that receives hospice services qualify as a patient for long-term care at home? This is an awesome question, Sylvia, because it's a little bit nuanced. So for their hospice medications, it frankly does not matter one way or the other, because hospice is a capitated payment program, meaning that the hospice provider pays for all hospice medications. Now, if they are authorized to continue chronic care management through Part D, then in most cases, yes, a hospice patient would qualify for LTC at home. By definition, a hospice patient is in end of life care on palliative care, and the intent is as they move into hospice to cease any healing care or any care that is moving towards making them well. However, some chronic care management is authorized. And so if they're chronic care meds that were billable through Part D, yes, they would qualify in most cases. Not every case necessarily. If the patient's still upright and mobile, for the early portion of hospice care, they may not. But generally, if they are a hospice patient, they are going to qualify. But again, only for the medications that would be filled through Part D, not their palliative care medications that would be filled through hospice. That goes through the hospice PBM, as the hospice organization will be paying for those. Yes. So Vanessa, great question. I mentioned that through ESI, brand medications are significantly enhanced over their retail contracts. Sometimes on the AWP minus to the tune of about 4 to 5%, depending. Let's see, last slide. There we go. So basically depending on the contract, your contracts with ESI, I think most contracts with ESI are reimbursing currently between AWP minus 19 and AWP minus 21. Their long-term care at home are sitting in the 14, 15 range, again, depending on the contracting entity. So on the brand side, ESI is significantly enhanced. On the Optum side, the brand is essentially flat from retail to long-term care currently, but the generic is significantly enhanced as well. So Carmen, yes, you would need to notify the patient that they are on a long-term care at home program. You don't say necessarily that you're on long-term care at home program. You can mention it as, hey, we've got a great new program. Let's say the name of your pharmacy is Paul's Pharmacy, then you could call it Paul Packaging or Paul Pack or something like that. One of the pharmacies we work with is called Matthew's Drugstore, and they actually call theirs Matt Packs, and they have a little strip packaging that they provide, and that program is how they notify the patient that they're on something differentiated within the pharmacy. Um, when you say LTC at home or long-term care at home, especially for patients that are maybe borderline on yeah, maybe they're borderline on how's a nice way to put this. They think they're still independent, but they can't drive and they don't want to give up anything else. So they want to spend 2 hours every Sunday putting the packaging, putting their pills in a pill program. The way we found to be very successful, and this is 100% Carly's outcome here. She actually helped her dad get onto long-term care at home, and she tried to call it long-term care at home and some other stuff. And he's like, "Well, I'm not old. I don't need that." And then she finally said, "Well, Dad, there's a benefit that you paid for through 30 years of service for the state of North Carolina that you're not utilizing. Why don't you utilize it?" And he said, "Well, I paid for it. I should absolutely get that." And so she had it all set up where that she could call the pharmacy and get it put on LTC at home. So the way you notify is to just call it a special program that is covered by their insurance at no additional cost to them other than their copays. Whatever you do, don't say it's free. It is not free. It is included. There's a material difference there. Free indicates that you are giving them something to induce them to use your services. Included means that you are billing for it appropriately. Jeff asked, how well is Optum paying? Optum right now on average is about 8 to 850 more per prescription on the generic side. So if you have a patient as an example, as a oddly specific example that has say 28 medications, 2 brands, and 26 generics, the increase in reimbursement is about $242. Again, that's oddly specific, but there you go. Optum AWP discount, I think, is AWP minus 19. We don't actually manage that directly. And so we have to go based on what our partner organizations are contracted at. We do anticipate that being better next year. And honestly, we honestly anticipate a significant improvement, potentially a significant improvement in reimbursement. But we do anticipate some brand enhancement for contract year 2026 on Optum regardless. Um, Shinu, great question. If the patient refuses the compliance packaging and they prefer it in vials, they have someone at home filling it in weekly pill packs, they prefer that. They are not a long-term care at home patient. I cannot stress enough that if you do not dispense in compliance packaging, that is not a long-term care patient because that is one of the 10 requirements for it to be qualified as a long-term care patient. We have pharmacies that we work with that actually dispense to group homes in vials, and they have to submit those claims through a retail PSAO, not a long-term care PSAO, because those are by definition retail patients because they're not receiving their medication in any sort of compliance packaging. There are some nuances there that we can discuss, but they are extraordinarily few and far between around automated dispensing systems that require a vial barcode. But it is a computer-based automated dispensing system with some significant guardrails around it. That's the only time I've been able to see anyone being able to do a vial fill. But it has to go into a automated dispensing system in the home. And even then you have to write up a pretty specific exception report to have that done. And the computer system is actually pretty expensive. So from what we can tell, it's way better just to provide it in compliance packaging from the pharmacy and go from there. Most pharmacies start with Dispill or SureMed or Cube from Pharmacy Automation Supplies as a starting point for this manual fill unit, manual fill multi-dose blister card, and then very quickly, usually about 50 to 75 patients, look at automating that process. Carmen, that is a very interesting question. So what's the external audit process? So until this year, we didn't really see these claims being audited terribly frequently. This year, we have seen a slight pickup, and it's not necessarily the audit that is concerning. It is the attestation that comes along with the audit. And the attestation is, how do you meet the 10 requirements for CMS? And I'm going to scroll back up to those real quick. So these 10 requirements here, how do you meet those 10 requirements, and what are you doing to do this? And so comprehensive inventory. So basically that's easy. The special packaging is the one that you have to be cognizant about. IV and compounding you have to be cognizant about. And then the one that catches most pharmacists off guard is the on-call service. Some of our friends in the PBM world are based out of Ireland. And so at 9 o'clock in the morning in Ireland, it's very early in the morning here. So let's call it 3 o'clock a.m. And so they'll call the pharmacy randomly and ask if someone's available to answer a question. And so basically that can catch you sideways or flat-footed. About 750 pharmacies were audited with that questionnaire. The actual audit portion of the audit was very immaterial. I don't know of anybody failing the audit portion, but quite a few pharmacies were not able to answer positively about these 10 questions. Shanu, can we bill weekly for the LTC patients instead of monthly? Absolutely. So as long as you're billing a Medicare Part D patient, if you do short cycle dispensing, you can bill however, for whatever frequency you fill in. Obviously I wouldn't recommend daily because there's a lot of logistics. But weekly, bi-weekly, every 28 days. CMS mandated a prorated copay and prorated reimbursement for short fills. And so in this situation, you can bill weekly with no problem. All right, so if you identify patients that are not ESI or Optum insurance, there are some easy ways to help them convince them to switch to Part D. So this is one of the things that we're working on very hard right now, which is how do we create a program around this? The couple things that we've heard that have had really good success is, again, introducing them to the program that you have in your pharmacy around compliance packaging, physician notification, delivery, and then articulating to them that, hey, because your plan doesn't cover this, there's going to be a small fee for you to have this service. Alternatively, if you are on a plan of one of these two types that does actually provide the service or does provide that level of care, then we can move you into that space. So open enrollment is obviously coming up quickly. It seems like it's going to be forever away, but I think it's, a few weeks at this point. So that's where it's a great idea to start looking at how do you convert those patients who are not Optum or ESI over to one of those qualifying plans. And remember that your dual eligible population can be converted as frequently as monthly. So you do want to be able to see if you can move those patients over as well. All right. If anyone has any questions, we'll give you another few seconds to put those in there. Thank you guys very much for your attention. And if you have any further questions, you're welcome to send us an email at team@ltcah.com. That gets to the most of us all at the same time, so we get an answer to you as quickly as possible. And Carly just put that email address in the chat, but hit us up at team@ltcah.com. And it looks like I don't see any additional questions. So, Jeff, do you have any final words for the group?
No, sir. Thank you very much.
Of course, absolutely.
Cool.
Thank you guys very much for your
Paul,
time. And
question came in.
Oh, what is a dual eligible population? Okay, great question. So, dual eligible population or Medi-Medi. Sometimes can be called Medi-Medi plans. So that's a Medicare, Medicaid dual eligible patient. Those are normally also qualified as dual special needs programs, or DSNPs. And a DSNP patient is going to have what is also commonly referred to as coordination of benefits, meaning that you either have a pre-claim file coordination of benefits where their copay is reduced very low on their Medicare plan, or you actually have to bill your state Medicaid to cover the second portion of their copay. All right. I guess thank you very much for joining us, and this concludes our live webinar.